Okay, welcome to Defin, episode number 38, right?
38?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think we have our young up and coming, that's what, up and coming closure talent, all the way from France, Valentin, or I'm not going to pronounce your complete name, but how do I say it? Valentin?
You say Valentin, which is difficult because those vowels don't exist in the English language. And
Valentin.
yeah, good enough.
Valentin.
Mm.
And the last name, pronounce it however you want. It's like even French people don't do it right. So
But that doesn't sound French though. Your last name.
no, it comes from Holland, I guess.
Holland.
It comes from I hear it means left shore, something like that.
Okay. Waeselynck or Waeselynck.
Yeah, we say Vaeselynck in France.
Waeselynck.
But it's not like, it's probably not how you would pronounce it in the original language.
Yeah.
Vaeselynck,
But anyway,
I
so...
think. If it was Dutch, it would be
Waeselynck.
Vaeselynck. Yeah.
Yeah, Waeselynck. Yeah, that sounds like a Dutch name though. Interesting. Okay, so let's get started. Valentin? I don't know.
That's pretty good.
Congrats.
Thank you. I can move to France now. So let's talk about closure. I think this sounds like one of those WAT videos. Let's talk about JavaScript, and then he makes jokes about JavaScript.
Yes.
No, let's talk about closure. Or maybe just give us a brief introduction about yourself. What are you working on? What did you do so far? And what are you going to do?
So starting from yesterday, I'm unemployed. I'm
Unemployed?
Yeah. Yeah, so in the last 3 years, I was...
Hang on, stop the interview here. We don't want to interview you unemployed. I mean, good Lord, this guy, who asked him to come on? No, go on, sorry, I'm joking.
So yeah, I've been in the last 3 years. I was in a small startup in Paris. Which did called Ben Square, which does a survey platform essentially to help. It helps event organizers to gain more insights and knowledge and leverage from their audiences. And so I've been doing that. And about a year and a half ago, that company got acquired to one of the ticketing e-commerce actors in France. And then after a year and a half, I decided to quit because I wanted to no longer be employed full-time and to spend more time doing studying stuff that I'm interested in and making open source stuff and climbing mountains and stuff like that.
We have this standard theme in closure thing, right? The people who get into closure, they slowly retreat to mountains. They're like, oh, fuck this thing. We're done. So somehow closure has that effect on the people.
Yeah. There's a 2,000 meters high mountain next to my home, and I put a hammock on top of it. And I go there to meditate.
Yeah.
So
you're going to spend some time in the hammock, and then after 6 months or so, you come with your own version of closure.
Yeah, maybe not. I'm not sure I have that potential, that kind of potential.
You never know.
I'm pretty happy with closure. Like, it's not like I'm not in a position where I'm like, oh man, all these languages I'm using, they suck. I need to do something else.
You'll get there. Give it time.
Well, actually, the nice thing about you is that you are actually using the languages. And I think Buzadar is more of a kind of like who was on last week and was a bit more negative. I think he's like a bit. I use something else, and I just like to chat about closure now and again and help the developers. He does good stuff, but I think he's like not doing it every day like you are. And like we are, I guess.
So what stack did you use anyway there?
Sorry?
What stack did you use in the
So in the startup, we
company?
started with a pretty common stack for startups at the time, which was AngularJS and Node.js and MongoDB. And when we pivoted essentially to a more data-centered focus, it no longer worked, and then we decided to move to Clojure and Datomic. And we kept the front end in AngularJS, and it's been our major, most important source of pain since. But it was like it would if we'd tried to migrate that at the same time, we would have beaten on more than we can chew, really. So so yeah, that was the right thing to do.
Was that something that you motivated, Valentin, or is that something that other people you got as a group, or how did you make that transition, that choice? Because if you're in a startup, it's not always the most obvious thing to do is to go with the Clojure Datomic stack. So, what was your process to get there?
It was pretty difficult. It was pretty difficult because the French software culture is very conservative. And it's really like in the software ecosystem in Paris, it's like PHP and Java are like very, very dominant, and you see some C# here and there, and when you're using something like Python or Ruby, you're considered really bold. And yeah, I had some experience with Clojure from a few school projects, and but I hadn't dared use it in a startup for the startup when we started it, and I have as we encountered difficulties, it was like it was mostly related to the database, to MongoDB, because when your app grows larger and more sophisticated, you're using MongoDB, you're essentially reinventing a crappy ad hoc relational engine on the client side, essentially. So it's like it really hurt us a lot. And so I was curious about Datomic because, of course, I knew Clojure. I was curious about what Richike's opinions were on the database front. And
just to go back a second there, Val, because you were saying that you were doing this, like you're inventing the relational database at the front. Is that because what you're saying is that you take like a set of documents from Mongo and then you do the merging and you do the joining in the client? Is that the kind of thing that you're talking about?
By client, I mean database client. So that's what you usually call the server side, the backend. But that's like we had more and more queries which involved many different entities, and the entity graph started the schema started to be really large, have a large diameter, and essentially I found myself like making joins by hand over a network. It was like it was bad. It didn't scale at all, and I took some holidays in the summer and I gave Datomic a try, and I was really it really blew my mind, like maybe more so than Clojure did when I learned it. And so a few months later, when we really couldn't go on, I was like, okay, we should probably move. I think we would make a very, like moving to Clojure and Datomic would solve most of our technical problems. And it doesn't, like, I did consider other stacks, I mean, like SQL and using languages like Python and stuff like that. But when I met the pros and cons of each alternative, it's like Clojure and Datomic always won because they really solved the hard problems. Like they did leave some problems, but those were easy problems. So that's why we chose that. And it was difficult. It was like convincing my partner, who was the CEO of the company, that to move to such a non-mainstream stack was was really difficult. And what we did is like we discussed it, and we asked for counsel from a few other people, like other CTOs, stuff like that. And we had on the phone maybe 3 CTOs from French startups and 2 or 3 people from the Clojure world to discuss the merits of that. And eventually she was convinced, and so we moved to Clojure and Datomic, and we did the big rewrite of the backend of our system, and which was exhausting. It was like it took me 4 weeks, maybe. Where I got like at some time I hurt my arms. I typed so much in a day. It was like it was a sport almost. And,
it was 4 weeks.
Yeah. The system when we migrated it was maybe 12,000 lines of JavaScript code, untested JavaScript code, which really doesn't help. And and eventually it became 9,000 lines of Clojure and Datomic, basically.
I mean, it's a different definition of exhausting, because I've been part of some migration projects that were like going from Oracle JHead Start to JBoss stuff.
Yeah,
that was a different kind of weirdness.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know. It's like going from one, I don't know, pan to the fire or something like that. So that was even worse. Going for 2.5 years and with 20 different teams and all the crap. Anyway,
what was the cutover process like, Valentin? Because the transition process from the old stack to the new stack, how did you achieve the actual transition in production?
So since I was the only backend developer at the time, what we said basically is no more features for a month. Like I will fix bugs, but I want we can't evolve the system. We have to leave it as is until the migration is complete. And technically, what I did is I really put a lot of emphasis on testing, which fortunately is really easy to do with Datomic and Clojure. And but so it was weird because the former system was not tested, and and like migrating, it's not about the number of lines of code. I think it's really about the number of tests, how well tested is it, or how do you really understand how it works in detail? And especially because I hadn't written all of its code, like a lot of it was written by some freelance that we had hired a few months ago. So I was like discovering all sorts of edge cases and stuff like that. But basically it's like one feature at a time. I migrated the system, I tested it, and at some point we switched the backend.
So was there an API kind of exposed to the Angular front end, or was it a bit more like informal than that?
No, it was really an API. It was like a single page app on the front end and an API on the back end. And so we did it that way. And one of the things that were very useful, I think, with Datomic is that with Datomic, because you have the... you can do something with Datomic that you can do on other databases, that you can hold it, you can have it in memory. And you can fork it, and forking means like essentially making a clone, a copy with zero cost. And when you have that, it becomes very easy to do system level testing. And so basically, the way we wrote test was like we tested each API endpoint, and it enables you to write tests that have a lot of coverage. That cover a lot of cases, because it's like it covers a huge code path essentially. So that was pretty useful. Well, I just need to understand how the API works, and then I test for that. And when the test pass, I'm done basically.
But what did you find interesting in Datomic? Because it might have been difficult part of the migration as well, right? Because the way the code has been written might be different, and especially if you're coming from MongoDB and then suddenly it's non-relational. Of course, Datomic is kind of non-relational as well. It's not completely different system. But how did you do that then?
Well, it went okay because a lot of the queries that we did in MongoDB was like fetching documents and then fetching related documents or parts of related documents. And the difficulty was that you have to do that over a network, basically. Like you have to do the joins manually. And with Datomic, you don't have that problem. Well, like we used the entity API of Datomic a lot, which gives you a sort of a map-like view of your database. Like it gives you a map-like view of your database centered around, I don't know, order 56 or customer 95, stuff like that. Yeah. And so basically, we basically took the same algorithms, but we didn't have to do all sorts of crappy workarounds to make that efficient, and consistent and stuff like that, because with Datomic that was natural. You had no work to do. So it mostly went fine, really.
So when you were I was going to say when you just sorry, please, Vijay, you go.
But in the front end, you didn't use DataScript or anything, right? Because you're still using AngularJS as the front end.
Yeah, I was using AngularJS, but actually, as a fun anecdote, we did use DataScript at some point because we had some analytical stuff to do, which were basically queries that had lots of joins if you do it in SQL. And so it became so, like, each time we have a new query to make, it was so much work to gather the data that basically at some point we decided to do something very ugly. We did we loaded all of it in a in-browser DataScript database, like thousands of entities and stuff like that. and we wrote the queries in DataScript. And that was ugly as hell, and it was slow, and it was a catastrophe, really. And all the pain went away actually when we started using Clojure and Datomic. And but we were using that, but we weren't doing very advanced data sync like Datomic to DataScript data synchronization, like you see in some projects. And we still don't. We still don't, and we no longer use the DataScript around the.
So, question about the you were talking about reinventing the relational things. So, how did you find the process of migrating like the document schema? Because people say it's like Mongo schemaless, but really documents form a kind of schema. So you have documents with embedded documents, and documents have relationships to each other. So how did you model that? Did you start from scratch with Datomic, or was it a fairly straightforward one-to-one transfer, or how did you do the data modeling?
We did it manually, but it was straightforward, really. Like the thing with Datomic essentially is that when you store data, you have to make a choice of schema, but you don't need to anticipate a lot of things. You don't need to anticipate how you're going to query it and stuff like that. You mostly don't, because the query language, the schema is flexible enough, and the query language is expressive enough that you don't have to care about that stuff.
Yeah. So you just made the entities pretty much what the documents were in the past, and then you just run the queries as you wish.
It was straightforward. Yeah. Although what was not straightforward, and that's somewhat of an issue with Datomic, especially at the time, is that with MongoDB we had some ORM, although it's not relational. We have some library that enable us to encode the schema and to declare it. And there's no agreed upon way to do that in Datomic. I mean, in Datomic, you declare the schema with some transactions, so you can write it in hidden form. But it's very verbose, and it doesn't necessarily declare everything that you want to declare about your data, and what invariants it has and stuff like that. And so we had to make choices about that, and these things evolved. Now the way we do it is we represent our schema, our data schema, in an abstract way in a data script database that acts like a bit as a UML diagram, essentially encoding data, and then we derive the datomic schema automatically from that. But at the time we started, we didn't do that at all, more manual stuff.
And do you use any of one of the things that I found funky with Datomic was the component entities. I like some of the aspects of component entities in the automatic sort of management, and the fact that you can, if you delete a top component, then the underlying entities also get cleared up. But I felt like some of the functions, some of the access functions around component entities were a little bit weaker. So I don't know if you used any of that tech or.
Yeah, we use in a few cases we use component attributes, but it's more the exception than the rule, really. And, I think we do it to encode some data structures in Datomic that are not natural to encode by default, but we mostly don't do that. Most of our entities, I think, like the rule for component attributes is like you should not be able to access that entity without going through the parent entity, essentially. But we haven't had that use case all that much.
So how did you run the Datomic thing? Because is it a hosted version, or is it something that you are hosting with Postgres in the backend?
So,
or is it the DynamoDB thing?
Yes, it's a DynamoDB. We took the approach of like doing the standard default hosting on AWS, because like I'm not much of an operations guy, so I was quite happy that there was a good default for AWS.
Yeah. Okay.
Did you use the templates from Datomic, or did you just roll your own things?
No, I used the CloudFormation template.
Yeah.
It's been fine.
Okay.
I find it to be maybe a bit expensive when you're starting. Like, I mean, but as soon as you hiring another developer, that becomes an insignificant cost. Like, it's.
But it is free for first year, right, or something like that.
The license, I was just talking about the cost in infrastructure resources.
Oh, of course.
Machines to run and stuff like that. And DynamoDB can be somewhat costly, but on the other hand, like, we didn't have that much write volume, and the read volume, like, everything got most queries hit the peer cache, so really we could tune our DynamoDB capacity pretty low.
Didn't you do most of your development with the starter kit in memory, or how did that? Because that's how I would have thought you did it, rather than actually being connected to DynamoDB all the time.
Well, you do need to. In production, you do need to have some durability. In development, in development we do two things. We do either what we call the lab environment, which is artificial data that we use also for example-based tests, and it's like really examples that we write in code, and it gets loaded in an in-memory Datomic instance. And the other thing we do a lot is to make an in-more local fork of our production database.
Right,
and that's something that's pretty unique to Datomic as far as I know. And like often when we need to debug something, we're like, I see where this is bugging production, so I just fork the production database and work on that on my laptop, like on my local machine.
I think the people at Heroku have their Postgres instance that can do forks, that you can fork the database. But that's a very unusual situation, and it's not as painless or as sweet or as easy as Datomic. It's some sort of magic on top of Postgres.
Yeah, I guess it must have some cost. I guess like it's like you have to copy a lot of stuff basically.
Yeah,
in Datomic, it's like
just a pointer.
That's it. That's like you take your database value. And so reference to database value, you put that in an ADOM, and you're done basically. So
But if you want to create a fork of the database or a copy of the database like Heroku does, then obviously you need to copy it at the DynamoDB level as well, right? You need to have the whole
No, you don't.
stack copy anyway.
No, but I think to do the Heroku thing, you do.
To do the Heroku thing. Yeah, sure.
Because in the end, you need to copy the shit on the disks from one place to the other. That's what that needs to happen anyway.
Yeah, they haven't got that. The temporal sort of nature that Atomic does.
Yeah. So going back to the Clojure part of it, so how did you start with Clojure? Because this is usually not the first language for most of the people, right? So what was the history behind it?
So it's a long story.
We've got a few minutes. It's all right.
Exactly. Yeah.
I started programming 13 years ago when I was 14. And
I thought you were going to say 7 then, but
no, I'm a bit older than that.
Okay.
But it was so I started when I was 14 learning Java. My father bought me a Java book, and it was my first language
for Christmas.
No, but Java will always have a special fond place in my heart because it was my first language, and that's it. I'm not objective about it. Although I no longer consider it a pragmatic choice for most of my projects. But I was really fond of Java, and I really didn't want to hear about anything else for years and years. Until I had to do some front-end development because some of my projects mandated it. And at that point, two things sort of happened. One was that I really felt I had some good mastery of Java, but it felt like running underwater, basically. It was like I knew where I wanted to go. I knew the steps I would have to take to go there, like make this class and this stuff and stuff like that. And but it was too long. I had to admit that I wasn't as fast as I wanted to be. Yeah, exactly. Running underwater.
For the listeners who are going to listen to this podcast, Ray is making his impression of running underwater, apparently. Or something like that, right? Yeah. Oh, okay, whatever. Yeah.
I can't put my feet on the table.
Yes, sorry.
And the other thing I discovered.
I love that. I love that simile, by the way. I think running underwater is a really nice way of putting it.
Yeah, is that a Frenchism or something? I haven't heard it in English.
No, not really. It's that.
Okay. Just a Valentin.
It was
thing,
so painful that I had time to come up with it. I thought about it.
You just took 13 years to come up with this this way of expressing how to work with Java.
Yeah, it's a really nice one.
So I started looking for alternatives, and I looked at Groovy, and I threw up a little. And I looked at Scala, and I was really...
You threw up a lot?
I was really enthusiastic about Scala at first, but I became somewhat disillusioned at some point because it felt like it didn't solve Java's problems. It just pushed the limitations a little further away, but not that far away. And it's a bit like, you're going from a balloon to a Zeppelin, basically. And it's like...
It's got good ones. It's got good ones.
Yes.
And so, whereas I had heard about Clojure before, but I dismissed it at first. It was like this alien thing, and it was not popular. And at the time, I still had the naive notion that because something was not mainstream, not popular, it means that it was worse. It was not as good. Which is not the case at all, actually. But I think many people entertain this notion, and I did. And at the same time, I had a revelation with JavaScript because I had to learn JavaScript, although I was really reluctant to do it because from my very dogmatic Java-esque point of view, it was really a disgusting language. and then
you mean because of like the prototype inheritance rather than the class inheritance, or incorrectness of equality?
Yeah, because no classes, no type system, stuff like that. No, and none of the ceremony that I like. At the time, I believed that ceremony was a good thing, like design patterns, stuff like that.
Okay.
And but I had a revelation. I learned it through Douglas Crockford's book and videos, and it's really called JavaScript: The Good Parts, and it's very good.
Yeah.
And I had I was
it's a very
initiated.
Small book, isn't it?
Yeah.
So videos,
yeah. But it's also it's small, but like a bit like Scheme, I guess. It's there's a core minimal language in JavaScript that's very efficient, very effective way of programming.
Mm-hmm.
And like I was initiated to first class functions and data oriented programmings and data literals and everything being reified at runtime.
Yeah. The thing I remember reading when I read that book was the fact that really the only thing that he really explained, and I think he explained it really well, was the notion of how to write a closure in JavaScript. And that was at the heart of the book, and if you could write everything as a closure in JavaScript, then basically you were golden, because then you had all the protection that you needed inside of that closure.
Yeah. It's like I was really impressed and changed my view of programming, and then Scala started making even less sense. And then I saw Simple Made Easy by Richiki, and I was really blown away. I was like, wow, this guy is much more lucid about programming than most of the people and technologies and stuff that I've encountered. So I want to use what he's making. And so I tried Clojure, and I was like, I did a small data science project, more data analysis, I guess, project with it. And I was blown away. I was like, man, I'm already done. Like, that's it. Like, it was very fast. And I discovered the REPL at that time, and it really changed the way I view programming. And I missed it. When I did in other languages, I've missed it ever since. Like, having the REPL and stuff like that. And I wasn't, I guess, like I was much less productive in Clojure at that time that I am now, but in 2 or 3 weeks of learning Clojure, I was already more productive than in Java for this sort of stuff. And I'd been doing Java for 8 years before that, so it's like I don't know, maybe also that maybe my brain had evolved to a point where it was ready for Clojure, and like my brain is set up in a way that it works well with Clojure.
What happened with because you were saying before that like you were really keen on like the types and all that kind of stuff, and then the JavaScript thing changed a bit, and was it JavaScript that got you a bit more relaxed about the fact that dynamic languages were okay, or was it Clojure that brought that revelation?
No, Clojure put words on what was wrong, but I was already feeling something was wrong in the way I was doing Java, because I think like doing Java in the idiomatic way is not the same thing as doing Java in the pragmatic way. Like in Java, you want to make elegant class hierarchies and stuff like that. And at some point, I noticed that I was waiting a lot of time because of that. Like because my systems were inflexible, and they were. I spent a lot of time doing some pointless design about how my classes would be composed with each other and stuff like that. And JavaScript showed that it was not necessary, that you could just have functions and compose them, and it worked better, essentially. And Scala, it showed me like, with Scala, I thought, okay, I first thought it's going to solve my problems with that, because you have more power, you have like implicits, and you have like, you can do some concrete behaviors in traits and stuff like that. And you have a more powerful system of generics and stuff like that. And like it didn't help in the end. I was doing even more of these pointless decisions than I was in Java. So yeah, you know.
So how do you feel? How do you feel about the Clojure community? That because it's as you said, initially you were thinking, popular languages with bigger communities are a bit different. So because you've been writing Clojure for I don't know how many years now, probably 5-6 years already.
Yeah, 5 maybe, something like that. I think the community is one of the unsung strengths of Clojure for when you want to do some pragmatic development with it, because like you have access to a lot of very bright and very helpful and very nice people, and like I wouldn't know how to do that, to access this in Java or JavaScript, but because everyone is so enthusiastic about the language, and it's like some kind of private club, or I don't know, like maybe it's a cult, who knows? But
it is a cult.
Yeah, we all have to we all have to kill ourselves soon.
Well, yeah, no, I don't think so, because I think I've become more lucid about software development since I've been I started using Clojure. And usually the point of a cult is to make you less lucid about reality and to narrow your views, And,
maybe you're missing out on all the design patterns, man.
I think you're right, though, Valentin. I think maybe it's the other way around, is that sometimes you realize actually Java and OO is a bit of a cult, in fact. I don't want to be too negative on that, but I felt a bit like that. I felt like, well, all of this stuff that I've been told for 10 years, and I kind of sunk a lot of my time into as well. It's just junk. I don't need it, and we can definitely do well without it. And so, do objects ever have a place? It's probably somewhere, but I think it's generally not that important and not that interesting for most software projects. And I feel like somehow we as an industry have got hoodwinked into that.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think the appeal of classes to businesses, and the reason why it became so popular is because it feels like you can enforce best practices by making class hierarchies, basically, and design patterns and stuff like that.
You can feel like you know what you're doing.
Yeah, and also there is ceremony, but the ceremony, it's like when you're doing it, you get attached to it, and it makes you feel like you're doing something good. It's like, okay, I just wrote private static void before that stuff, and although it's not minimally required to write that program, I took the time to do that, and so it feels like you're following best practices, and there's a lot of that, I think, in Java. And again, I'm really fond of Java, but I know that I was biased and in this way, and I was really narrow-minded in this way. I was like, I had, like many programmers, I read the design patterns book by Gangnam 4. And after that, I had my honeymoon period with design patterns, where I was like, okay, I have this problem to solve, and I was like, okay, I'm going to use this pattern and this pattern and this pattern and stuff like that. And it didn't yield better designs, actually, because design patterns are good as an inspiration, but not as a guiding principle. And
did you ever read the Effective Java book by Josh Block?
Oh yeah, and I love that one. And I still do. I still like it. It's really, really good book.
Yeah, he had a lot of nice things. Basically, he was telling us about immutable data. That was that book was where, oh yeah, actually final is good. I can just do final strings, and I don't need all these getters and setters. I can just construct an object and make it into a map and have. Yeah, so that was a nice book, actually.
I think Richie said that one at some point, right? Because if you introduce all these kind of things into the program, suddenly you start to feel clever because, or you feel this some sort of satisfaction that you build this complex system with all these class hierarchies and all that stuff. And I have a pat on, I'm gonna pat myself on my back because I made a program with 2,000 classes that extend 17 different interfaces, but it's so clean. That's kind of bullshit. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Well,
well, I think people do manage to get that right, but I don't know if you've seen the Lord of the Rings. Like at some point they have to go through like the Marsh of the Dead or stuff like that, like this swamp in front of others, and like Gollum tells them, don't follow the lights.
Yes.
And I think working in class-based languages is like that. It's like you want to follow the lights, you want to make the classes and all, but you must not follow the lights, or you'll end up in a pool with a dead guy clinging onto you. And
in this case, dead code, you mean, right? Yeah. Yes, the code that
the object model is kind of dragging it.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Like, don't follow the lights. Like, don't. I know it's tempting, but you have to make the unelegant thing.
Yeah, at least when you're running underwater, you can actually reach up and go to the surface. But when
otherwise, you have a dead weight.
Yeah.
Man, I remember some things I wrote. Like, I'm ashamed of it. Like I had some piece of data to exchange from one point to another. I was like, okay, I'm going to make an interface for representing the shape of the data, and then I'm going to make an implementation of that, and then I'm going to make a builder for that, and then a factory for that.
Yeah,
builder.
Those builders, awesome.
It's crazy. Like I felt good, but it was like it was not especially readable. It was inflexible as hell, and it was a huge waste of time.
But also the thing is that at that time, I think the reason why practically everybody started believing it is that it was very convincing because you could model the real world with objects. That was the whole idea, right? I mean that seemed reasonable, and then you get all this fucking example with shapes and cars and lights and whatnot. And, Bruce Eckel and other people telling that, hey, this is how real world is, and you can model them if there is a bulb, and then you can model a bulb, and then it has a switch, and then that's a method, and then it makes sense because there is some sort of a simile. I think for me, similarity, but I think for me the one of the things that blew my mind away was the article rant by Steve Yug.
The Kingdom
execution, Kingdom of
Nouns.
Nouns. Yeah, I was like, fuck yeah, this is weird.
Yeah.
So far I've been so much thinking about nouns, and then you forget about execution completely. And executions are the key driver in functional programming languages, like writing code that is actually doing something instead of thinking just in terms of nouns.
So how many Java programmers does it take to code a light bulb then?
I think you need a factory first. You need an abstract builder factory programmer
factory.
Yes, that implements I don't know, whatever, light bulb interface.
Enterprise light bulbable. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Bulbable.
Yeah, that's true. One perspective I heard, and I heard it from Eric Normand, who is also in the Clojure community, and he said like one of the appeal of class-based programming is that you can write your code as English. It's like when you want to design your program, you figure out the nouns, and then you figure out the verbs, and then the complement or others, stuff like that. And you put these respectively in classes, methods, and arguments, and you're done. And it's very intuitive to program that way. It's like you have no decisions to make. The problem is that it yields by designs by default. And I think that good OO programmers are those that learn to not do that. To like, no, that's not how I have to do it. And I think that's where this similarity to reality comes from. But you see it breaking, like, for example, with ORMs. Like, with ORMs, like you express the code in your language, in English, but you fail to acknowledge the distributed systems reality and the way that your data is shaped and stuff like that. And so it's not really the real world.
Yeah, I'm not sure where this familiarity towards object orientedness comes from. Maybe this is also from the history as well. I think before we started recording, we're talking about familiarity of the syntax as well, right? I mean, but that has a reasonable explanation that most of us, or maybe most of the programmers, start from C-based languages or algol-based languages. So suddenly switching into something that is not familiar, then that feels weird, and then that feels wrong. I think that familiarity is conflated with being right.
Isn't it also that object-oriented like hierarchies or like examples, they do demo quite well. They talk, you can talk through them quite well. But the problem is when you get into like a more complex business domain, you can think, oh right, okay, now I've got this sort of set of hierarchies, these set of entities. And you think through your use cases and you work it all out and it's all good. But then there becomes this tension between something like the client or the reporting side or other side, and then you're one of the reasons people like relational databases is because you're not stuck really too much with the schema. You can express queries and join things ad hoc. You can't do that with objects anymore, because you're kind of stuck in this world where if you want to implement some things differently, well, you need to refactor the whole class, or you need to refactor the whole hierarchy. So the flexibility, the changeability, your ability to, you basically made a big bet right up front about whether you're right or wrong.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. And that's something that we're not collectively, we're not very lucid about that. And it's totally that. I mean, it's like object-oriented, the class-based approach feels right until you have, basically you design with the class-based approach, you design your system like statically, like you design for one point in time in the evolution of your code base. But actually most of the design decisions that we have to make when we design software is about how things are going to evolve. And like you're making assumptions and you're saying, okay, how fragile is that assumption? How fragile is that assumption? And you make your design decisions based on that. Like you met inflection points and flexibility based on that, and that's good design. But that's not natural for us at all, because what's natural for us is like a fixed design, and we're not well equipped to think about change in design.
I think we like to feel. This is maybe just an anecdote, let's say, but I think that people like to feel like they know what they're doing, and if you have these object-oriented classes and you can show a type system, you can show this kind of, you can show it all works. Yeah, I've got this class here and that class there. I can explain myself through these types. Then it sort of makes you think like you know what you're doing. But as you say, Valentin, really, you kind of don't, because you're not accepting that there will be changes. You're trying to say, well, I've got a bigger vision in my types and I will be able to make changes and they will be able to accommodate changes, but you don't know what's coming. So inevitably you're you really know that you're going to be wrong, but you're not accepting that. That's how I feel when people explain that to me now. And I've been on the other side. I've definitely made class hierarchies, and I've been very proud of them and thought they were fucking brilliant. And aren't I clever? But then I got bitten in the ass by reality.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to you.
Yes. So let's talk about the REPL stuff. So you, I think one of the very nice contributions that you made was the REPL guide. So can you talk about your experience with REPL and why REPLs are awesome?
I wrote about that a bit. As I said from the very beginning, the first thing I loved with Clojure was like the REPL, the interactive experience. I felt it was really a game changer in the way I program, and so as I wrote more and more Clojure, I was always thinking about that. And and this time I was not writing Clojure. I was writing other languages. I was always missing it, and so I spent some time thinking about it, and wrote a first article about that, and then I hired a programmer for my company, and I had to teach him how to use the REPL. And I think that's one of the hard things for onboarding people on the Clojure project when they don't know Clojure, is that they're used to doing things very differently. Like I could saw him struggle like debugging stuff and learning stuff, and I was like, man, you should be using the REPL for that. It's like you're wasting your potential tremendously. It's like and so it reminded me of how strange it was in the beginning. At that point, I was like, okay, if I'm having this problem, I must not be the only project like having this problem. So I said, okay, I'm just going to just gather all the techniques I know about the REPL and try to organize them into a guide. And yeah, it took some time. It's like I spent maybe several weeks on holiday in the subway in Paris and stuff like that, writing stuff on my notebook. But there's this thing and this thing, and I learned quite many things in the process too, because I was like, okay, well, it helped me get my ideas straight about why it worked, and that really helps. And the other thing was like I had to survey like all the REPL tools and tool chains that exist and stuff like that, and I learned a lot of things when doing that. There's a lot of stuff I did.
But I completely agree with you, because every time I tell a new person about REPL, it sounds like, oh, this is a completely different way of doing things, and it sounds like I'm like a snake oil salesman or something. They're like, it's so difficult to express, because if you read a book, you can't get it. It's not possible. Okay, you see some static things floating around. This experience is so difficult to convey.
Yeah, it's really live. It's really live. Like it's just like you can describe, I don't know, music in a book. Like it's
exactly. It's so difficult to tell people, and writing 10 times saying the same thing suddenly makes people more skeptical. They're like, okay, this sounds like bullshit. So that's the danger of this one. And unless you try it, unless you have an editor that is linked with REPL, and then you go through the cycle of building programs using REPL, it's extremely difficult to tell that, okay, Python has IPython, but it is not the same. How can I explain this to you? It's very tricky.
And it also speaks to the fact that the medium we use to communicate about code and design and programming, they're not really very live, and not very. They're very static things like code and stuff like that. And I think that's something that we should do. We should do more, like of showing you how I do it, and. We should share a lot more, and I think it would also really help beginners get started with programming. I remember when I was a beginner, I was like, but how was I supposed to figure out all that stuff? And there's a lot of people saying that it's very long and difficult to learn how to program. I don't think it has to be that long. I think that a lot of it is that we have this it's like. At some point, it's like oral tradition mostly. Actually, it's like you know how to do that stuff because you had one mentor in one job that told you, and you were lucky at that point. And along several years, you gather the piece of the puzzle, and at the end, the puzzle makes sense. But it doesn't have to be like that. Sometimes I'm thinking, man, if I could travel in time and spend an hour with my past self. Before I started, I could say, okay, you have to learn that, and that, and then I would have progressed much faster.
The other thing I like about what you were talking about there as well is that, and it's definitely something like the scales fell from my eyes with the REPL, was that other languages, because of their lack of liveness, they inhibit discovering things. They inhibit exploration. And it's kind of like, I don't know if you know of this Brett Victor guy who did all the kind of I'm a big fan. The interaction should be linked to the coding, and we're not quite there with the REPL yet, but it's a much more live feeling like that, I think. with the REPL than it is with traditional compiled languages where you have to wait for all of this, did I get that line right? Is my semicolon right? Even with nice editors which are compiling as they go, when you still run your program, you're still kind of, have I got the right data from the API? Whereas in the REPL, you can just explore the API. You can just ask whether everything happens in fractions of a second. It doesn't happen in tens of seconds or even multiples of seconds.
And there's a time it takes to happen. There's no number of distractions, like how many manipulations you have to make to get back to the point where you were, I think the REPL really helps with that.
I think people say I think there's some things about like REPL-driven development and REPL-oriented development, and I think the orientation is important. I think it's a tool like many others, and sometimes you use it more than others. But I think it should be always there. It should always be there and handy for you. And it should be a first-class citizen.
You must be disciplined to you have to keep your programs in a way that they will be accessible from the REPL.
Yeah, that's part of your guide, which I really liked. Which is, maybe you can speak a little bit about that. Is like REPL designing for the REPL.
Well, I mean, by default, you can get your program in a way that that won't be easily to when you have to debug something. It will become too difficult to reproduce the environment of your code and stuff like that to manage the problem from the REPL, and then you stop at some point, you have too much context to recreate, or you can't do that, and it doesn't come naturally. It's not automatic. You have to be vigilant of that all the time, and it's not you, because it's like that with tests as well, with testing, you have to write your code in a way that can be tested, and some people do that to the extent they do test-driven development. We're going to write the test first so that stuff is testable, and it's the same way. It's the same thing with the REPL. You have to think. And I mean, in real life, when you see how cars are designed, there's a hood so that you can access the engine and every part of the engine, because every part comes back, and you may have to make an intervention of almost every part. So almost every part is made as accessible as possible, and it constrains a lot the design of cars. But it should be. But it's a win. And it should be the same with our programs. And that makes me think about what you said with the exploration, because a few months ago, I've been doing a PHP project where a lot of the work was figuring out the domain, because it was some data processing, and I have to find out empirically what the invariants of the data were, and because the project had to be in PHP, I got it from another guy who had started it but left the company. I was like, okay, I'm gonna do it in PHP as well. But the iterations I did for exploration was so slow, because I didn't have the equivalent of a REPL, that at some point I decided to migrate the project to Clojure, do it in Clojure, and then migrate it back to PHP. And that's what I did. It was faster that way. I was like, man. And I think there's one mainstream.
I get half of that story. I just don't get the second half. It's like you've converted it to Clojure, and then you convert it back again.
I regretted it later. I regretted it. I thought that, okay, we just shouldn't have done that thing in PHP. I mean, even when all the company wants to do PHP and loves PHP, don't do data processing stuff in PHP. It's just really
good for websites.
It's it doesn't work well at all. I don't know. It's like going in the snow in the mountain with no shoes. It's like with with the wrong shoes. I don't know. It's like.
But speaking of REPLs, so is it Emacs or some other shit?
I use cursive. Sorry to disappoint. And I'm very happy with cursive. I tried to adopt Emacs 6 times, I think, and I failed each time. It's like, and it really like it hurts me. It was like
Emacs hurts you.
I tried it myself with the ability to learn several programming languages, and I had managed to change my programming paradigm with Clojure and stuff like that, but I couldn't change editors. I was like, it was a humiliating experience. But I think the difference.
Emacs is humiliating. Now that's got to be the headline of the show.
I think the
you've got editor shame.
I think we humans.
A good craftsman blames the tools. Yes.
I think what I mean. I'm happy with cursive because I see the value in Emacs in the way that I can be much more productive at editing code, but I don't spend that much time editing code. So I don't feel like that's a big gain to have. But it's interesting, I think, to think like, why was it relatively easy to change languages and change paradigms, learn new stuff, but not change editors? And it's because I think as humans, we're good at changing the way we think about things that we can describe in words, essentially, in natural language. And the things that makes Emacs click, in my opinion, for many people, can't really be described in words. It's like every person has their own handwriting, and there's no words to talk about that.
I think that makes more sense. It's more or less like explaining why REPL is better than non-REPL languages.
Yeah,
it is similar to that with Emacs as well.
Challenge as well.
Yeah, because you can't explain.
But that's also true of comparing programming languages. Like a lot of language debates you see over the internet, they're like most of what you hear is said by people who only know one of the alternatives, who only know one thing and not the other, and think they can compare, but actually they can't. And when people get into arguments with me, but you don't have a type system, stuff like that, I'm saying, no, I'm not going to that discussion. There's no point in having a theoretical discussion about that. You want to assess if it's good, you have to try it. It's like
I think for me, because I can relate to both of them, because I was a big Eclipse fan when it was released long time ago. And I built Eclipse RCP programs, and then I switched to IntelliJ, and then I was a very big fan of IntelliJ, all the shortcuts and everything. And I really like the way it is for the Java programs. But Emacs has been, the one of the things that I kept using, and then now pretty much practically I use Emacs for everything these days. For me, the comparison is like, going to McDonald's or getting a microwave dinner versus coming home and then cooking stuff yourself.
Yeah.
So it's really there is a really good food available outside. You can go and get it, and then that's good for that menu, whatever. That's nice. But then when you come back home, when you cook every day or when you're cooking, a lot of times, then you don't have a recipe in your mind. You see the ingredients and then you make something that you like.
Yeah.
So Emacs is more something like that.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm really bad at that. I can't cook without a recipe. It's like.
But we start at some point, right? So that's the idea.
Some culinary initiative. No, I can't do that. It's like.
But for me, that is the difference. I think
that's interesting.
Conceptually, it is fairly similar, because you come to the editor and then essentially it doesn't provide you anything. It has some things there, and then it gives you a lot of flexibility. It gives you a lot of tools available that you can, and the similarity that you said, like handwriting. Everybody's Emacs is different because they customized it into their own recipe.
Is this an Emacs show now, by the way? What's going on? Yeah.
Sorry?
Is this an Emacs show now? What's going on? We had enough Emacs last week, mate. Come on.
Inevitably, every show becomes an Emacs show. It's like, every language is a crappy implementation of Lisp, every editor is a crappy implementation of Emacs.
Okay, don't take it too personally. Let's move on. Come on.
Now it is personal, of course. What do you mean by too personal?
Maybe. Okay, we'll do some therapy afterwards. Okay, let's get back to Clojure. So, I mean, I would like to go back to the REPL experience actually, Valentin, because one of the things that like I notice in my work is that interoperating with things like JavaScript and Java, those are the things which I find tend to kind of like hold back the REPL-iness, that your ability to maintain like a REPL discipline, because as soon as you have to like interact with Java systems, often it's compiling things, or it's like, I don't know, there is a kind of runtime necessary for it, which is awkward and different, and you have to set state outside of, there's all kinds of state going on. I mean, JavaScript is a great one for this. There's all kinds of state being set at a global level at different scopes. So you try to interact with their APIs and you're not quite sure what's going on. So do you have that experience, or is it mostly you just mostly do pure Clojure these days?
Yeah, I've been mostly doing pure Clojure, so I don't have that experience much. Although I do feel that when something is immutable, it really helps with the REPL. And when it's mutable, it hinders it, because like the REPL is good for exploratory work, so you're going to make mistakes. And like when you get into a bad state, you should be able to discard it, basically. And when things are mutable, you can't. Like you get into a bad state, you're stuck with it. So I think, I do think that mutability hinders the REPL a bit. About the runtimes, like you said, I haven't experienced that personally, but I think it speaks again to the fact that you must design programs to be REPL friendly, and of course, that's not the case when it comes from a language that doesn't have a REPL, doesn't have like, it's not idiomatic to be using one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I often feel like that's a good motivation to me to actually wrap a Java or a Clojure or a JavaScript library, is to make it REPL friendly, because then I can hide the mutations that are going underneath and just make my calls into it in a more elegant, normal way that is more functional. Because just putting an API for no reason doesn't make any sense. It's just just making it idiomatic is bullshit, I think. But if the underlying thing is mutating things, and you can somehow abstract away from that, then that seems like it's a good REPL thing to do. Anyway, you're not hitting that problem, so we'll move on. Back to Emacs, Vijay. How's it going?
Yeah, I know. See, eventually you'll see the light. But so Valentin, I think. I don't know.
Oh, good.
So, what is your future plan? I mean, what are you going to work on? Because I can see of course, we blocked you from going to your vacation. We know that.
Yeah, I'll be on vacation for a few months. I start work again on October, but my plan is to keep a lot of free time to study things that interest me, in particular mathematics, but could be other things, and also to do open source development. And the next open source project in Clojure that I want to release is an execution engine for GraphQL and similar languages. I don't know if you're familiar with GraphQL. Heard about it? So
we've been using
maybe for the listeners, GraphQL is is a query language for exchanging data between clients and servers, where you give more power to the client to say what data you want. So you're not like you're not saying I want the customer's resource or I want the order resource and stuff like that. You're saying I want that customer, and of that customer I want to know the first name, the last name, the email, and her orders. And in each order, I want to know like the amount and the ID, the SKU, I don't know. And it's very similar to Datomic Pool. And it's also very similar, for those who know it, and it's also very similar to Omnext Omnext also has a query language like that with a system of parsers, and it's all the same ID. And so the motivation for the library is that it's very nice on the client side. Like making that happen on the client side is always a good story, but it's much more challenging on the server side because you're quickly exposed to stuff like the N+1 query problem and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so the goals of the library are first to prevent that from happening, because like let's say the instinctive and naive API for registering server-side logic for creating an engine like that is to say that each attribute is computed, each field, as they're called in GraphQL, is computed by one function, and to say the function accepts like one entity and one field and the arguments for that field, and returns a value. But you can see how it creates the N+1 query problem. And so the approach of the library that I want to release, which is called D2Q, is to say by default we're not computing one attribute of one entity. We're computing like the several attributes of several entities, and to like we're computing a table basically. Like you receive like a set of rows and a set of columns representing entities and fields, and you have to return a potentially sparse set of values, and that's how the library works. And once you do that, you essentially remove the N+1 query problem, and you gain more flexibility for computing fields derived from other fields. And the other thing is to make an execution engine that can work with GraphQL and with Omnext and with Datomic Pool and stuff like that, that accepts all of these inputs, like a bit like JVM bytecode, you know, like. Okay. Like I'm giving you a runtime from that, and you can make as many front-ends, compiler front-ends you want for that, and so that's the idea basically because I think that's for projects adopting that architecture. These are the challenging parts, and so the idea of the library is to say, okay, we have a good foundation for these challenging parts, and for the details of how the syntax level details, essentially, you choose your own solution, essentially.
What do you one of the things that people object to some extent about GraphQL is the security model around it. So do you have some thoughts on that, or is that still left to the implementations?
It's still left to the implementation, because there's security authorization logic tends to be way too application specific to be encoded in the library, in my opinion. But I think it quickly becomes a performance problem, actually. It's like you have to, so the idea of the library is to do batching, the logic, computation logic in batching, in batches. And when you do that, it also helps with security, actually. It's because the downside of putting your security logic close to your data computation logic is that it exposes you to a lot of denial of service attacks and stuff like that. And so when you give more, you have a more foolproof way when you do computations in batching to prevent that. And the other thing is that GraphQL made the mistake, in my opinion, to offer a text-based query API like SQL did. And the thing is that it's an intuitive medium for humans, but it's a very bad substrate for programming. It's like you can't build stuff on top of that, because even if you make an AST for that, it's going to be an implementation detail. It's not going to be standard and stuff like that. But when you have your queries represented as data structures, you can do a lot of static validation and stuff like that to enforce application-specific security rules, among other things, and also caching logic, and also all kinds of stuff. So,
nice, yeah. Cool.
Well, and that's one of the other objectives of the library, is to have like a data-oriented format for queries.
Okay, cool. So you're going to take a nice vacation and then come back with a lot of new ideas to implement all this stuff.
Yeah, well, it's already implemented actually. That's we used that in the company I just left, and now I just have to make it like
open source.
Yeah, and
make it
like to make it more general and document it and stuff like that. So yeah, but most of the work is done. What remains to be done is to really make also, I want to make a proof of concept of an adapter between GraphQL and that, because we don't really use GraphQL at my company. We use an ad hoc thing, so yeah.
So you're going to make it nice and REPL friendly as well?
Yeah, sure. As always.
Good to hear.
As always. I mean, it's meant to be used idiomatically from Clojure with immutable data structures and stuff like that, and so it will be naturally REPL friendly, I think.
Well, one of the things that, and again, I'm interested to hear your thoughts about this, is that because I've started to write a REPL, as you know, this like shared user REPL, multi-user REPL. One of the things that I sort of was impressed by that they're doing in the core now is this automatic ability within the REPL to load up a library at runtime, and it changes your class path and all those kind of things, which is, really, really nice. I think it makes the REPL even more powerful, I'm wondering whether you've done any of that yet, or, it only really works with projects that support deps.eden and all these kind of things, but
Yeah, so as I was using Line Engine based projects, I haven't had the occasion to do that, but it was it did feel painful. On the other hand, I mean, I restart the REPL a few times a day, usually just when I'm switching Git branches, essentially, when too much of my project code changes, I usually feel like I should restart the REPL. So, I'm fine doing it when I add a dependency too, because I don't add a dependency that often. But yeah, I'm speaking about something that I don't really know. Maybe that's something I need, but I don't know that I need it yet. So
again, I think it's one of these things which, if you can do it, it feels really nice, and then you don't have to change things, and you can change Git dependencies on the fly as well. By the way, it's not just libraries. So yeah, you can even the thing because that's what deps.eden supports. It supports local files, Git tags, Git shards, Git coordinates, and also Line coordinates as well. But I think the tools, the adlib stuff only does the deps.eden for the moment. But but it's really nice, to be able to do it is a really nice feeling,
And the whole new dependency management story with Clojure, with the tools deps and stuff like that, it's really nice, and I don't think it exists in other languages much, actually. And that's one. When you see what they're doing with Datomic ions, it's all based on tools deps, and it enables a lot of cool stuff like that. When you hot deploy your code on a machine that's already mounted, they change the dependencies on the fly and stuff like that. It's really good, actually.
Yeah. I think it shows to some extent the value as well of fully understanding the host platform, because really all you need to do is change the class path, and so it shows the flexibility of Java and the Java virtual machine to some extent as well. But anyway, that's a different subject. But I think having this dependency stuff right in the Clojure core, it's still not. I feel like the people out there aren't really doing it much yet. Again, like you say, they're kind of well, I've used Lineagen, and why should I bother? But actually, there's just a small point here. But there is a tool called Line Tools Deps. And it's a little project. And what you can do with that project is you can take your current Lineagen project and just replace your dependencies into deps.eden. And then you can still have all your Lineagen plugins and all those things, and Cursive can still work. but you can start to use the deps.eden, and you can start to use the git shards, and you can start to use all those innovations right now, even if you still want to play with the Linigan world.
Yeah, and I've been starting new projects in Clojure recently, and I use tools I use deps.eden projects by default now. If I can, if you can do that, it's good, I think.
Yeah.
And there's a project called Juxt Edge that gives you that by default, and I think it's good. It's a good way to start a Clojure project.
Well, there's a party starting in my house right now, so I'm going to have to leave you.
Bye,
Okay, so
and you've got a
on
pack
that
for holiday.
bombshell, yeah. So let's conclude then. Just a couple of different things. I think a couple of other things. Clojure D has been announced already, and then I think the call for proposals are open. It's a fantastic conference. We were there last year.
Yeah, really good.
It's an amazing thing. And also, I think there is a new conference that is getting started in Belgium, Heart of Clojure, by Arne as well.
Yeah.
So hopefully, I think that will pick up the steam as well. We haven't started, at least I haven't started the thinking about DCD yet, Dutch Clojure Day. And there is Clojure Tray still happening this year in September, November, somewhere around.
Clojure X in London,
I think so.
In December.
Yeah, Clojure X in London in December. So there are still steam of things going on, lots of things going on. So will we see you, Valentin, at one of these places?
I don't know, maybe at Clojure X, but I wanted to go to Clojure Tray, but I won't be able to. Well, it will be in September, so I'll probably be climbing on some cliff in the south of France at that time. But so I don't want to make any plans in September. But,
no worries. Anyway, hey, thanks a lot for taking the time right before your vacation.
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me.
Good luck with climbing and hammocking and thinking about all this stuff and graph theory. And we'll be waiting for your next release of the open source of the fancy GraphQL engine stuff.
Brilliant.
So that's it from us for this episode, I think. Thanks again, Valentin.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, that's a real pleasure, Valentin. You're a star. Good work. And I love running underwater. Yeah, that's.
Now we can all go back and then start running underwater. Or use Clojure and then just keep floating around and sail.
Freestyle.
Okay, have a nice evening. And bye-bye.
Yeah, you too. See you around.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm going to live load myself.